For quite some time now, the question has been posed to you, what is it that's present when stillness and movement meet? But moving along from that question, as we've all moved along, the question that's now posed to you is, what is that state that lies beyond Satchitananda, or existence, knowledge, and bliss, or beyond what is called the gunas 3, rajas, tamas, and sattva, movement, inertia, and balance. Or in other words, summed up, we can say existence, the movement of existence. So this is the question that's raised and will continue over these coming days. But we all know, undoubtedly, that adage about enlightenment. Before enlightenment, trees are trees and mountains are mountains. During enlightenment, trees are no longer trees and mountains are no longer mountains. After enlightenment, trees are again trees and mountains are again mountains. But how does this adage fit into this story about the great poet and philosopher Lao Tze, who was the student of Lao Tze? Lao Tze decided that he would go to seek the tutelage of the great old Taoist master called old Chang. Now, old Chang was a gruff and grumpy old man, so he treated Lao Tze very badly. When he wasn't ignoring him, he was bossing him around or scolding him. So after some time, Lao Tze became very, very tired of this treatment and decided that he would like to return to his home village. But then the thought would always come into his mind as a reminder of what he'd said before he'd left, and that was that he was not going to return to his home village until he'd become an immortal and wise. So he remained with grumpy old Chang, and he followed the meditation practices that were given to him. And after some years, he found that he could no longer make any differentiation between good and bad, and in his utterances make any judgment about whether what he was saying as good or bad. And that was when old Chang started to notice him. So this gave Lao Tze great encouragement to continue with his studies and his meditations. And after several more years, Lao Tze found that he could again make judgment between good and bad, and in his utterances make discrimination about whether those words would have good effect or bad effect. And that was when old Chang called him by name. And Lao Tze was very much encouraged. So he went on with his contemplations and his meditations until his mind came to that state where good and bad didn't exist, and he no longer made any judgment about what was coming out of his mouth. He just let the words flow without any thought about whether they were going to have good effect or bad effect. And that was when old Chang invited him to sit on the mat with him. But Lao Tze went on with his meditation practices until he arrived at that state and place where the inside and the outside were the same. The thoughts that came into his mind were like the rustling of the sounds of the wind in the trees or the rain on the roof. And he could not bring himself to make any judgment about whether what it was that was present was good or bad, or beneficial or not beneficial. And that's when his eyes became like his ears became like his nose, and his nose became like his mouth. All senses and that which flowed rendered him to be like a dead leaf blowing in the wind, except that he himself could not tell whether he was the dead leaf or the wind that was blowing. The end of this story states, if only we could be like Lao Tze, we would then know the intrinsic nature of all things and know the illusory quality of all that seemingly moves. But the enigma of this story is that Lao Tze is telling the story. But how does this saying, before enlightenment, during enlightenment, and after enlightenment, fit in to our experiences of life now? What is our relationship with life and life's relationship with us? How does this adage fit into this story of Lao Tze, and how does this story fit into our own experience of life now? And in fact, where is enlightenment?
Is enlightenment at the point where you let go of all that is illusory, and that seems to be real, or
perhaps it's the beginning of the journey that leads us into that state of illusion or absence of illusion? Enlightenment, what does it mean? What was your experience of it?
I think it's sort of when you wake up from believing that everything is just, that's so hard to put in words, but making you aware that things are more than just what you are seeing right here now.
Yes.
That there's more to life than just that everyday nitty-gritty.
And how does that fit into our experience now?
You kind of, in both places, like the nitty-gritty and in that awareness of what else there is.
And this question, what is it that lies beyond those three levels of existence, the nitty-gritty, airy-fairy and transcendental? if we consider these questions, how does this adage fit in to the story? We have a beginning. We have a beginning for the mind to be able to comprehend and understand what the answer of this question might be. So to bring it to a level of mind, just like the stories, in understanding the stories at their different levels, we can have some grist for the mind to bring it to that point where it can acknowledge, express, and understand its experience. This is the point of these gatherings. So looking at the question, how does this adage about enlightenment fit into the story? Can you relate to being the dead leaf as Lao Tze describes? Not knowing whether it's the leaf that's being blown or the wind that's blowing? We know it well. We know it well. And what happens? What's happening to you now relative to this? Not knowing where your foot's going to land when you step out, in real terms. Not even being able to conjure any thought of a future. Even possibilities are fleeting. What is this state that lies beyond Satchitananda? To allow the mind to be at rest in it, we need to answer these questions. Thank you.